Rashmi, Chris, come up quickly. Introductions and insights. And then we go to what scares and excites you. Thank you, guys. So, why don't you start? Actually, Chris hasn't spoken yet, surprisingly.
Okay. Hi, I'm Chris Wood. Very quickly, I am with a company called 3BP Partners. We are investors, technologists, and operators that effectively now in healthcare, rather than sell products and services, rather than sell solutions, we're selling what we think the healthcare system really needs, which are outcomes and cash. So we can.
You're selling cash?
We're selling cash.
Okay.
We're selling cash.
How are you doing that?
We are basically partnering with the healthcare institutions, taking risks with them, operating the businesses we're creating with them, and sharing the financial and outcome rewards with them. So we're not a traditional vendor saying, let us sell you something. It's let us invest in something. You give us your data, you give us your brand, you give us your distribution. We will create products that are incremental to you to bridge you to value-based care and outcome-based care. What scares me is, look, I don't need to go into how messed up our healthcare system is, right? We all know that this country's investing twice as much as anyone else per person in healthcare, and we're getting the least value for our money. That is also coming down to our healthcare institutions. McKinsey has published reports saying our healthcare institutions are 200 to 300 basis points underwater in terms of the difference between what returns they're getting from payers, the growth in that versus the growth in inflation. And they're $500 million behind in the last 3 years in terms of the discrepancy in payments, right? So their margins are single digits. They're getting lower. Our healthcare systems are in trouble. And, we're still fatter and less healthy than everyone else. I think this is a national emergency. I think we could wind up, or we certainly don't want to end up as a nation of Wallies, right? If you remember the movie where, we're just a bunch of puffy, non-thinking individuals who, are living on machines basically because we can't take care of ourselves. I think this is a national emergency. What excites me is that always within massive problems becomes massive opportunities, right? The technology's here, AI is here, solutions exist. Solutions themselves are not the answer. They're part of the solution. Technology is not the answer. They're part of the solution. But how the entire business model of healthcare really needs to be rethought. The incentives need to be rethought. But if you can help figure that out, I think that's a massive opportunity. Who wants to go?
I think she should.
Ladies second.
Thank you, first of all, Mark. Nice to be here with all of you. My name is Rashmi Joshi. I'm the founder and CEO of Asha AI, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. So I've been building businesses since I was 16 years old, working currently on Company 5. My third as founder CEO. I've been very fortunate to have had a couple of exits along the way. And I also advise a small number of family offices and funds on specifically healthcare, AI, and impact investments, which I personally believe should be every investment that we make, especially in this room.
What was the 16-year-old business when you were 16?
It was a dance company. So I grew up singing, dancing, acting, and modeling. So I performed all over the place and had a great time doing it. What scares me most is that a lot of the innovation that's happening now, thanks to AI, is all based on making our lives more comfortable and more convenient. And there hasn't been a tremendous amount of thought going into figuring out what happens when we make our lives too convenient. What do we actually do when we're not forced to innovate? And that scares me because it could mean the breakdown of our innovation fabric as a society. I think most of us as innovators on this panel too, we build things out of necessity. And so when we don't have that necessity driving us to ask questions, then how do we actually create new innovations that are leaps and bounds ahead of the way that we live now? And what inspires us? Because very easily we could say, most people who are retired experience a huge decline in terms of their health, in terms of their well-being, in terms of their mental health. They're less likely to reach out to their communities and connect with people. So we could go in that direction if we're not careful about how we decide to respond to this influx of AI tech. But we could also go in the opposite direction and say, hey, we're going to take this as an opportunity to focus our energies, our efforts, our time on building something that's truly leaps and bounds forward. So that scares me, but I'm also optimistic, as we probably all are in this room. And I hope that it inspires more of us to build more community, to have more conversations like this, and to start building more innovative solutions to bigger problems than the ones we're experiencing now.
So I guess you've already answered that question, Alex, in a different way, or unless you have any additional thoughts.
I mean, do you want me to give an introduction of the company and how it relates to agriculture?
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. I mean, very quickly, once again, Alex, great to be here. Founder of a company that uses satellites and AI models to map the footprint that farmers are having on the environment. Fundamentally, it has two purposes. One is to measure the agriculture sector's contribution to climate change and how we can solve it. But two, and where we see the world heading, is actually being able to measure the carbon that the farmers are sequestering by adopting climate positive practices in the form of carbon credits. And that is important, especially when you zoom out and consider all farmers. It's not, say someone.
So in doing this, what surprised you the most in your journey?
Sure. Agriculture specifically, but I'm imagining there are other sectors.
And by the way, you've raised like $18 million,
Yeah, so
Bloomberg and
we're
others.
very fortunate to be backed by Bloomberg, Microsoft, and then the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Singapore for very strategic reasons, and we're operational on multiple continents. What surprised me about agriculture is, one, the tradition inherent in the industry. These farmers have been doing things their own way for generations. It's family business. You need to come in humble and not just, be the typical Silicon Valley, shaker and disruptor, because this is, not just their livelihood, but their land and their legacy. And that has consequences both in terms of how you work with the farmer community, but also fundamentally speed of scale. You can't just come in and expect to grow like a hockey stick, because cycles are quite literally annual. You plant, you try, you come back in a year, you reassess. So I would say, not to bore anybody else more, I would say the biggest surprise was the juxtaposition between the Silicon Valley philosophy of building a startup and the reality of how the agriculture sector operates.
Makes sense. So anyone else have any questions in the health, ag, education sectors for our panel?
Can you use your tech? Thanks. Hi, Robin Blackstone. Can you use your technology to determine nutritional value in the foods that you're evaluating? Because right now there's a big discussion around ultra-processed foods and the actual value, to your point, that we're getting out of it. If you could somehow pair that might be actually extremely valuable to people.
So funny you mentioned that, because we actually started out doing that. So when you look at satellites all around us, the data can be used for whatever purpose you want, because ultimately what we're doing is we're understanding the chemical composition of the soil and the plants that cover it. So we originally started out with the idea of understanding the nutritional complexity of the soil and the plants, and then using that to understand where exactly do you want to spray your nitrogen, where exactly do you want to apply your other fertilizer. The challenge came in terms of commercialization, because we weren't bringing new money to farmers. Whereas of carbon credits, you're laying a new income stream on top of what they're already getting, which is yield. And unfortunately, the system today pays farmers only for the yield, not taking into account the health aspect of the food or the soil. And they operate on very slim margins. So they're very risk averse to try and compete new things. But to answer your question in short, as we see the trends in terms of us becoming much more interested in what goes into our bodies, yes, technology can support us being able to provide more nutritionally whole foods.
I actually have a question about that as well.
You always have the hardest questions.
So I actually agree with you that we're living in one of the biggest genocides of our time right now, and we don't really even know it. Most of us in this room are consuming on a daily basis thousands of ingredients that are illegal in most European countries, and there's no way to avoid them. So to follow up on what you just said, are you actually able to determine the nutritional content of the actual produce that's being grown, not the soil, but the produce? And the question to follow up on that is, when you have companies like Monsanto that have IP on specific seeds, and you have neighboring farms that are not using those seeds, but as we all know, seeds disperse naturally. So if you are a farmer that's not using that specific type of crop, and Monsanto seeds gets into your lot, they can actually sue you for using their products without explicitly paying for them, which is how they've squashed millions of small-scale farmers to date. So what are you doing to protect small-scale farming? And are you actually able to detect nutritional content of produce?
Great questions, great questions. I'll start with the first one, which is, can we quantify and measure the nutritional content of produce? We measure the application and the growth of the plants, so not just soil, but also the leaf canopy. But a lot of the nutritional content actually is downstream. How you process it, what do you mix it with, et cetera, et cetera. So we can help with that, but we're not going to be the entire answer. In terms of helping smallholder farmers, this is something that I'm particularly passionate about, but it is a harder technical challenge. And what I mean by that is, using satellites, one of the magical things about it is that if you can measure carbon in a big farm in Iowa or Australia, you can measure carbon on a farm in Ethiopia, for example. And given that a lot of the countries in the global south, as we term it, have skipped over the landlines and are all digitized with cell phones, there's a digital path to where you can measure the environmental footprint of somebody's smallholder farm and then pay them for that impact if the proper system is in place to incentivize that. Do we see that at scale today? No, but my hope is that we're going to get there sooner rather than later.
Okay, I have a question. So we're looking at this today, and maybe just over the hill, maybe looking back a little bit, but there's so much technology that's going on, and there's so many problems in food security. We're familiar, Eddie and I, with vertical farming and indoor farming, and now we're going to have a problem with people coming in and being seasonal workers. Just one small example of what might be resolved if you could figure out other models using technology to feed the planet, and to do it with less microbes and plastics, if you can do it in a controlled environment. This maybe applies to health tech as well. Where do you think we are in the percentage utilization of technology compared to the technology that's reasonably available? And how long do you think it's going to take before we see that sort of tipping point where these problems are really being solved, not just on the margin, but in a material way?
Well, look, I'll speak to at least the health tech side of that. And I think a lot of things you were saying about food and ag, it's very similar, which is there's a misalignment right now between incentives and outcomes, right? Whether it's, are you incented for the amount of food you make or for the nutritional quality of the food you make? Are you incented for keeping people healthy, or are you incented by the amount of procedures that you do on sick people? We all say we want one thing, right? But people are paid by the other, right? And I had a mentor decades ago who used to tell me, lead somebody by their W-2 and their hearts and minds follow, right? So, and that's fair. So until you align those incentives, it's going to be difficult. I can speak to health, I can't speak to ag. There's a lot of technology there. I think one of the challenges, at least in healthcare, is you have entrenched institutions who are motivated economically by certain regulatory frameworks, and they're slow to act. And so getting those things done at scale right now, until you change the business model, is very difficult, right? That's why we say we're trying to change the business model. We're selling outcomes and we're selling cash. We're not trying to just sell you technology, because guess what, Mr. Hospital, you don't have the money to pay for it anyway, right? So I think you really have to look fundamentally at the incentive structure and the business structure to really make, until that change becomes really prevalent.
I think it's going to take too fucking long to change our policy. So I've given up on that. And as an innovator, I focus on what can I change and how can I actually spearhead innovation in such a fashion that it forces the healthcare system to change. And we're experiencing that as we speak. So with Asha, my company, not to go on too much and give you guys a pitch, but I built Asha after my grandma went through cancer as a tool that would help elderly folks, those with disabilities, people who are bedridden or going through cognitive decline, to have a tool that they can just chat with that's going to help them to stay on top of care. And since then, it's evolved into a platform where now different kinds of healthcare organizations are approaching us, asking to leverage our technology in ways that we had never conceived of. One example of that is the head of clinical innovation at Memorial Sloan Kettering approached me and said, Rashmi, have you thought about using Asha to help us run virtual drug trials? Because we've been looking for a tool like this for the last 10 to 15 years. We've tried building it ourselves, and it hasn't worked. And imagine if you are, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, you're sitting at home, and you're thinking to yourself, well, I've just been through this intense treatment. There's no way I can participate in this amazing research study that I found on the opposite side of the world in New York when I'm based in India, and afford flying there in and out and staying there every few weeks, every few months to report my outcomes. Well, now, actually, you can do that through Asha without getting off your couch. So having the ability to participate in potentially life-saving clinical research from any part of the world, no matter who you are or what kind of state you have in terms of your health, is such a massive leap forward. And it's something that is actually very aligned with incentives across the board, with the clinicians who are responsible for managing your care, with the pharma company who's looking for greater insights on how patients are responding to their medications. And it's also much easier for family caregivers and patients. So I think if you're driving any kind of a systemic change, you have to be bullish about it. And you have to find ways to align incentives rather than waiting for the policy to catch up to you. And I also think that no one's asked this question yet, but I think it's an important and valid one, which is, how is AI going to change healthcare? I think eventually we'll start seeing care being delivered at home again. We'll start having things like even routine surgeries being done at home, because you'll have surgical bots that could easily come to your home. You have a greater chance of recovery, because I think it's crazy that we send all sick people into this great little place called a hospital or a clinic where you're already immunocompromised and you're spending time with other sick people. Your likelihood of getting sick from just going to the hospital is actually much higher, right?
Right. Or sometimes you're like my father, you don't even want the care that he needs because he doesn't want to go there.
Exactly. Exactly.
Speaking of care and self-care, I'm going to make an audible. You might not like it that we're going to take a break right now. I stacked this up with lots of panels and didn't put a break in. So I'm going to take some time from this panel and the next one a little bit, just get some movement, and continue this discussion and your break, and come back at 3:05.
Movement is good.
Movement's good. All right, take a break. Come join our 361 Firm community of investors and thought leaders. We have a lot of events created by the community as we collaborate on investments and philanthropic interests. Join us.